I said, do you feel also in children? I said, well, maybe. How about children in underwear? I say, yeah, you know. How about if you thought you saw children naked? And I said,
Since the first national news story about priests sexually molesting children broke in the U.S. in 1985, the discourse surrounding sexual abuse in the Catholic Church has been focused on the sordid details of the sexual abuse and not the cause of the priest's inclination towards pedophilia. The artistic response to this issue has fallen into this trap as well, shocking audiences into understanding the gravity of the issue but avoiding advocacy. This clip from Amy Berg's seminal 2006 documentary Deliver Us from Evil relies on the very simplistic approach of framing pedophilia as a horrific act and priests as malicious predators, which ultimately lacks nuance. Those are the conclusions that any sensible person would make, and that's often the only information the average Catholic parishioner has of the abuse within their own community, evident in Steve Bannon's recent tirade against the Pope for failing to combat parish sexual abuse more effectively. This was the set artistic attitude for decades, featured in films like Bad Education, Silence in the House of God, and Primal Fear, until 2014 when writer-director Tom McCarthy debuted his film Spotlight.
Law knew about Gagan for years, no question. Our family is rooted in the church. Our desire is to protect the holy orders. Even in the midst of our agony over the 7 boys in our family who have been violated.
Spotlight tells the true story of the Boston Globe, exposing a deep-seated culture of child sexual abuse and cover-up by high-ranking church officials in 2002. The film was met with positive reviews for its refusal to shock the audience into submission. Reviewer Sheila O'Malley said of Spotlight, "Remember that the whole story is bigger than just one bad apple priest. He wants to go after the whole system. That's the big game Spotlight is after. The overarching corruption of the church is the new central problem." Most films addressing abuse in the church fall into one of 4 quadrants on the spectrum of representation, in which the y-axis represents the spectrum between inspiring change in the discourse and emphasizing previously existing ideas, and the x-axis represents the spectrum between condemnation of inappropriate sexual behavior and advocacy for change in the church. Despite the strides made by Spotlight, it still exists in the quadrant of expressing previously existing ideas. The larger overarching question persists: why is this phenomenon so common, and why has so little been done to address it? So much of clergy rape and sexual shame stems from stunted ideas within the Catholic dogma about the importance of sexuality and human maturation. How do artistic representations of the interdependence of sexual pleasure and religious ecstasy demonstrate the necessity of the Catholic Church's tolerance of sexuality? To answer that question, we need to take a more intersectional approach, including priests' female counterparts, Catholic nuns. Maggie Bett's 2017 film Novitiate tells the story of Sister Kathleen Harris, who joins a convent at the age of 17 with the intention of becoming a nun. During her time in the convent, she's exposed to the limitations of living as a nun, including strict vows of chastity. When director-writer Maggie Betts was asked why she chose to tell this story, she responded saying, "To be so starved of human contact is psychologically damning. The spirituality of these women is so resilient, but I wanted to explore whether or not that was enough. The film portrays the passionate, almost romantic relationship nuns hold with God." Gian Lorenzo Bernini's 1652 Baroque sculpture, The Ecstasy of St. Teresa, depicts St. Teresa of Avila being visited by an angel. For centuries, the artistic community has been divided over whether or not the saint is in a state of physical orgasm. Simon Schama of The Guardian wrote in his 2006 article, When Stone Came to Life, that Bernini is attempting to convey the passion of religious devotion through St. Teresa's orgasmic expression, drawing a parallel between religious ecstasy and the body's physiological response. Novitiate attempts to communicate this idea of the inherent connection between divine love for God and physical passion. The film concludes with Sister Kathleen falling into deep despair and isolation. In response, she seeks out comfort in another nun, Sister Gabrielle.
Please, I just want to be comforted. Please, please, please. 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 Shh, 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 shh. Okay.
Bernini's depiction of religious ecstasy and Bett's depiction of chastity giving way to eruptions of sexual frustration demonstrate artists' opinions that expectations of the church that their clergy be celibate are physically and psychologically damning. But these are only examples of women in the church. The question remains, how do artistic representations demonstrate the necessity of the Catholic Church's tolerance of sexuality in cases of priests sexually abusing children? For that, we need to look at the history of the Church. Deliver Us from Evil features an interview by Patrick Wall, a theologian within the Church, who claims that priests at the time of the Catholic religion's first foundation were allowed to marry and have children. By the 4th century, to provide a greater endowment to the Church, the cardinals made an addendum to the Catechism that priests were required to take vows of celibacy, so that net sum of their estates would pass to the Church and not their children. The culture of sexual shame within the Church comes from this man-made dogma and permeates the entire Catholic population. Stephen Frear's 2013 film Philomena speaks to this idea, demonstrating the traumatic repercussions that follow outlawing sex in a Catholic community. In the film, 18-year-old Philomena is forced into slavery by nuns for having sex and giving birth to a son out of wedlock. This film speaks to the saturation of shame not only in ordained Catholic populations, but within the entire universal congregation. Dr. Tina Shermer-Sellers of Seattle Pacific University writes in her book, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, that there is biblical evidence of a sex-positive God who created man to partake in abundance, which includes the full extent of sexual pleasure. Ultimately, the cover-up of sexual assault is a political issue because the church is an inherently political organization. The original cause for Steve Bannon's criticism of the church was condemnation by the papacy of American conservatives for the nationalistic rhetoric they persist. In that respect, the church engages with the political world properly, advocating for tolerance. However, the political nature of the church often excludes the public sphere. No piece of art better represents the secretive, politically volatile atmosphere of the Catholic Church than John Patrick Shanley's 2005 play Doubt, which tells the story of Sister Aloysius, the principal of the Catholic grade school, who hears via another nun that the new priest assigned to the school assaulted one of the students. The play speaks to the role gossip plays in the Catholic community. Many of these parishes are insular communities, and gossip is part of the culture. Gossip, hearsay, and he said, she said are often the only evidence usable in accusing a priest of abuse. But to ignore the sexual perversion of these priests would be to disregard the key focus of this issue. What made Spotlight such a poignant film was its portrayal of the deep-seated psychological issues that persist in Catholic spaces.
I never raped anyone. There's a difference. I should know.
How would you know?
I was raped.
Both Spotlight and Deliver Us from Evil show evidence of accused priests having a history of childhood sexual abuse themselves. A study conducted by psychologists Randall, Dalton, and Guilfoyle entitled Roman Catholic Clergy Who Have Sexually Abused Children, Their Perceptions of Their Developmental Experience, demonstrates a correlation between joining the seminary as a young adult, stunted sexual maturation, and seeking out relationships between psychosexual peers. This kind of research that shows what can happen when sexual repression reaches a precipice manifests as advocacy for priests to have romantic partners. The end credits of Spotlight show the reaches of clergy sexual abuse. The Catholic Church is a truly universalizing religion. Both its dogma and its abuse reach across borders, languages, and cultures of vast difference. Ultimately, the artistic response to clergy abuse is vastly different because of the broad reach of the issue, but the intention is the same: combat physical, mental, and emotional abuse in the church. These artists echo Psalm 9:10. The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Those who know your name trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. Because ultimately, the righteous will vanquish the corrupt and the corrupted.